Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And in this episode, we're talking about games, especially educational games, and what makes a good game.
So it becomes very challenging to make a good game that don't have a fundamental system and are based on facts. Now, that's not to say that you can't make engaging activities that, you could argue, are playful or whatnot, that are really just, quizzes or whatnot. But what the stuff that draws me forward is thinking about these deeper, richer social, cultural, and situated kinds of meaning making that can happen through this other category of games.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartell.
And today our guest is here to talk about games, simulators, and the research of creating a good educational game.
So do you get a lot of people saying, all you do is go play games for work? And you're like, yes, I do.
There are certainly perks to it. We have a miscellaneous budget, for example, that does mean that our kind of Steam account and Xbox accounts are pretty darn full.
Oh wow!
That's David Gagnon who joined us. He's director of an educational video game studio and research lab at the University of Wisconsin called Field Day.
So, do you think when you were growing up, did you have this? Did you have a moment where your parents were saying "Stop getting off the get off the PlayStation. You'll never make anything of yourself with games."
Well, it really makes me feel old because the PlayStation came out when I was in college.
Yeah, I was going to say PlayStation.
I was trying to find a platform that was, I was trying to thread that needle of age right there.
Now, how did you get into this kind of area of research? What was your background? It wasn't always video games.
No, that was a little bit of an accident. I mean, kind of formally, I had an undergraduate in computer science, and I made the move to education right as I was, graduating and figuring out that kind of early career. So my first real job was as an instructional designer and kind of technical trainer.
Oh, okay.
And I found that I had no formal education training, but I really liked teaching. Just really, really enjoyed that process of education. So when I started doing instructional design, I just really wanted to do, a great job with it. And that immediately took me toward simulation and trying to create, these kind of authentic learning environments. And as you can imagine, once you've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of thinking, what kind of experience are we creating for a learner? As soon as we went down that, video games came up as a thing to explore. And it was by pure accident that I happened to be at the university that was kind of, just the central hub of the early move forward in research around video games and learning, with folks like Jim G. and my advisor, Kurt Swire, and Constance Steinkuhler. It was just an accidental, amazing opportunity. So while I was designing professionally and, kind of had a full-time job as an instructional designer, I started grad school and I just got inundated with this world and all the learning theory that it's based on.
Sure. Now, I stumbled upon your work from a talk that you gave titled Video Games for High-Quality Equitable Learning, which you talked about video games and simulators as teaching tools. Simulators, so not all video... So how do we say this? Would we say that not all video games are simulator? No. Not all simulators are video games, but all video games are simulators. Is that correct?
I would say that every video game has some sort of simulation at its core, at its center. And the design of the game is really a matter of figuring out how the player is interacting with that simulator and how that simulator is providing some feedback to the player. So when I think of, the classic, simulators of flight simulators or, whatever is it, business
Formula One.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's the role of the game then is the thing that is mediating the relationship with that system.
Sure. Well, can you have a simulator that isn't a game? Like, what makes a game then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You can absolutely have a simulator without a game. We could whip up some little thing that, simulates, a simple like mathematical equation or some kind of fun thing like flocking or something. But it's that system around it that gives you, and these are key words for me, roles and goals, that when we start having those, then that simulator becomes it becomes kind of the engine or the tool in which a player is trying to move towards some sort of goal. And that's how I at least think about it.
I think of the PhET simulators, PhET.
Yeah.
Those simulators, like there'd be a gas law simulator. There really is no win there. You're just trying different things.
You haven't tried to blow something up with a gas laws simulator?
Well, I mean, right there, you quickly start setting your own roles and goals. Maniacal explosion.
That's why I think simulators are almost like games that just haven't been all the way built yet. To some degree, if you have a PhET simulator, and they do amazing work, and what they're doing is they're just passing off the responsibility to the context of use to come up with what the goals are, right?
Yeah. Well, I know, and you got to forgive me, these are I guess just out there science teacher questions, but a simulator versus a model then. I mean, when I think about teaching with models, how isn't a simulator then just a model of something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like really deep into this right now, given that I've got several projects right now that are around scientific modeling. And yeah, here's the distinction I would draw with that, and this is a fresh one, so catch me again in 2 years. But right now, I would suggest that a model, and the way that we use model, the word model in science education specifically, I would say that a model is a synthesis of some amount of observation or insight that's given. Okay. And that's why a model can come in lots of forms.
Yeah.
A model of a solar system that sometimes people poke fun at, like the model of a solar system that's like a drawing or, like something you make out of cardboard or whatnot. And I actually would think that it's an incredible example of a synthesis of many observations that have been brought together into some cohesive way to explain all of them. So a model can take on many forms, and a simulator is a form of model. But a model is a much larger category of thinking. That makes sense?
Yeah, that works. I come from the modeling instruction for physics kind of branch there, so that works really well.
I like your nomenclature and classification there. I want us to take a step back here. Both Dale and I, of course, work in education, and we work with helping teachers use technology. And often we see teachers serving up learning games, and you can't see me do air quotes right now, but they call them learning games. And there's times I question the learning that's actually taking place, student to screen. Whereas, is there any distinction between a game and a learning game, or can all games provide learning?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say that in the community of people that I kind of belong to, that question divides it maybe in half, but certainly creates two groups. And one group, I think everyone would agree all games are learning games to some degree. And I would say that all games, again, have some sort of simulation at their center, again. And therefore, all games, as you interact with them, a good player or an expert player has created an internal representation where they have reverse engineered what that simulation is, and they're predicting what it's going to do, and that's how they move towards their goals. And that happens in any game that exists, right? You're kind of figuring out the strategies that move you in the direction that you think they're going to go. But then when it comes down to instructional uses of games, the group split off, because I think one group would say that the kind of rich learning that happens with and around video games generally is really based in the informal tradition, where we're thinking like just kids and interest, and good stuff is happening just all over the place, and we should leverage those existing commercial games. And then I think there's another group that I would really place myself in the middle of, which says, sure, that's certainly happening, but we really believe in this whole public school system, and we're trying to make the best use of video games as a medium in order to like move towards a specific learning objective. And
Sure.
And those are just different worlds to some degree. So I don't
When
like
you-
set
right,
myself in the esports world, for example. That's like a whole other thing that comes up with games, or game making as an educational activity.
Well, even I think of a Call of Duty where we might have groups of children or adults even working together collaboratively. I mean, there's lots of non-cognitive skills that they're developing, but it may not be something that's, I guess, assessed in a fifth grade test, so to speak. And so definitely there can be learning there, but is that learning, like you said, working towards an educational goal or instructional kind of practice?
Yeah, knowing that instructional goals and practices are inherently political, they're inherently, they move through eras where they may be interesting or not. So I think there's something to be said about that thing too, which is like sometimes the fact that something has become an instructional goal might mean that we've missed the real value and spirit of it. And I think with that in mind, I really appreciate the thing that I think unifies those two communities, which is just this notion of like situated learning, or what David Schaefer calls epistemic frames, or I think what some people will call like authentic contexts. So that's where I try to have all of our work center, is to say, if we're talking about science, for example, as a practice, let's make sure that the main thing we're being inspired by isn't just, a set of standards or things that fit well in the shape of a classroom, but let's go talk to scientists and try to figure out what they do, why they do it, what discourses they use around it, what a good day looks like, what a bad day looks like. And that forms a much richer inspiration.
Do you think in terms of educational games, if I think about teachers that, they may be presented with educational games that they should try to use in the classroom, maybe they're being pitched to use a game or purchase a game or things like that. Do you have any advice for those science teachers out there that would be looking at that and sort of evaluating and kind of like what to watch for, what to look for, and what to maybe watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. In my mind, it's kind of coming back to even our earlier talk of this word simulator. This is one of the kind of shibboleths of a good learning game, right? It's on one extreme, I always think that there are these categories of things that really are like quizzes with like sound effects and graphics. Right?
Oh, so good.
Did I hear a Kahoot back there?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like
ding,
ding, and and those get labeled games. And then there's this other side of things, which are these big, rich, like I always come back to like Kerbal Space Program or Civilization or some of these games that are these just massively complicated systems that you interact with, and it gives you authentic feedback within that system and such. So I think of those as kind of being on like the extremes of some sort of continuum. And I think the thing that marks kind of a quantum shift from like a quiz to something that I would consider like a good learning game would be that there's the presence of a simulator that creates some sort of surprising or emergent outcome based on the inputs that you give to it. And that would be for me one of the things that is a really good indicator that we might be in the right ballpark.
All right.
Well, wait a minute. So more like almost like, well, it's not like choose your own ending. It's like give input to choose your own ending kind of thing. Is that sort of what you're saying? Like it responds to the feedback, the input you put in? Yeah,
and it ways that hopefully are surprising and interesting, right? So, you think about
so just math facts, routine math facts wouldn't cut it, even though you're putting content in and getting feedback, but it may not be that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where a simulator is different than a fact, right? And especially in my early career, I felt like I had so many projects where, we'd be working with some subject matter expert, and they would have like a pile of facts, and they would say, "Well, can we make a game out of this?" And the answer is no, not a good one. What we need to do instead is find a system. And when we can find a system, so I'm, being careful with the language here, it's very similar to simulator, but when we can find a system, that's the foundation we can start building on, right? So it becomes very challenging to make a good game, or even the category of games that I think are interesting and educational that don't have a fundamental system and are based on facts. Now, that's not to say that you can't make engaging activities that, you could argue, are playful or whatnot, that are really just, quizzes or whatnot.
The review Jeopardy game?
Yeah, that's just not the world that I'm interested in exploring. That'll happen. Flashcards will always be used. They have a use.
Yeah.
And they do have a use. But what the stuff that draws me forward is thinking about these deeper, richer social, cultural, and situated kinds of meaning making that can happen through this other category of games.
David, we take a look at your website here, and there's a handful of games that are on here that are portrayed. Welcome to Lakeland, Joe Wilder in the Capital Case. Can you tell us a little bit about those games, maybe how they started and what you've learned from them now that they've been kind of live?
That's too big.
Okay, that is a lot. That's a lot of questions right there. But I'm just curious, how do you get a game like that started, and what's the target audience, I guess?
Yeah, that's great. So right out of the gate, like Field Day is kind of subject agnostic. We really move from one topic to another. As I mentioned, we're really based on the idea of practices, is the deepest inspiration we can find. So our projects kind of launch in two ways. One of them is that I write a research grant where, we're trying to explore the world of teaching and learning. And, we're saying we've got some new theory that we've got for how to do that, or we've got some new experiment that we can run if we build a certain kind of game. And that's how certain games get created. So the Yard games, are kind of in that category, or, our big release that's coming out here in just a couple months called Aqualab. This is in that category where they're federally funded, kind of projects. Oh. And then we've got this other category, which is like a meeting I was just in earlier with Victor Zavala, who we built Lakeland with and now have a new project. And this is when we partner with practicing researchers, and I mean that in a broad sense. You've got one with Sue, Robinson, who's a journalist, or, thinking about Victor, or some scientist at the MERSEC, which is the Material Research Center on campus. And, they're doing research, and they're pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, and they have a responsibility back to the public to disseminate that to, broad audiences, that we all get to benefit from the result of our taxpayer dollars. So I work with those groups quite a bit too, to come up with games that take some element of their research and, bring it into the classroom or into some public audience.
Oh, wow.
Those are the two routes. And then along the way, we have all these great partners like PBS, Wisconsin, PBS Twin Cities. We work with museums, on and off as it happens. And then we work with Brain Pop and now Legends of Learning as distributors. So almost every project we do has quite a cast of, scientists or, researchers of some field, with teachers that do co-design with us, to distributors, to, the organizations that they, work within. So they end up being these pretty big, large projects.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, there's I even see Discover Ice Cube. So in partnership with the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory.
Yeah.
Like there's that. I think about specific science ones. Lakeland looks something along that lines too.
Yeah, Lakeland, it really comes out of some research around phosphorus cycling, farming, economies that exist around farming and waste management, and then lake quality. So this is a good example of a project that kind of has a mission. It's really trying to explain this phenomenon that we see. If you live by a lake. You probably have seen an algae bloom these days, and trying to build some high level kind of scientific literacy around what is going on there. What are the systems at play? It doesn't have a political answer. If anything, it does the opposite. It shows that it's complicated.
Right. So then I'm assuming that this is used in classrooms. Do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, a lot of classrooms. we have a process that I mentioned co-design earlier, where we recruit usually cohorts of 15 teachers that we work with during the development phases of a game as well as the production phases of a game. And that means that any game that we are working on is usually played by about 1,000 kids or so, by the time we're wrapping it up. And then a pretty average stat for any one of our games is that they're usually played at 100,000 times a year approximately. So they get used all over the country, quite a bit.
How does your work differ? And I know there's some obvious answers to this, but how do you think your work differs from game development companies that are making commercial games? Do you think there's some obvious differences there as to what they're talking about? And are there times where you guys are having the same goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think you call it out right away with motive. I'm at a public university, and I feel like the work that I do and Field Day does is completely within the public good. So, we're really waking up every day and saying, how can we use the skills we've got to, make the world a little bit better of a place, and in a world where things like science denial is real, or boredom is real. I find boredom to be, just a sad thing, because the universe is so full of mystery and wonder. We're really working on that, thinking about kids that are being excluded from that, thinking about teachers that, have big dreams but don't know how to get there. We've got all these kind of missional things that we're working on. And I think the role of any gaming company kind of right out of the gate is it's primarily, and has to be primarily based in finances.
Yeah.
So that limits the risks they can take. And for us, making an educational game is all about finding a game mechanic that really aligns with the domain that we're in. And that is hard, and it is risky, because most game mechanics are pretty horrible. There's a reason why shooters are so popular, because it's they're inherently fun. It's been proven over and over and over again. And the amount of iteration that's happening on those games is so small, really. Where I would feel like we look way more like an indie studio that has to innovate on the mechanic every time.
Okay.
But it puts us into a really different category of how we do everything we do, when the outcome is maximizing learning or affect or self-efficacy, instead of trying to get someone to insert a credit card. So by the time we've got a game made, we're not looking to make money from it. There's no motivation to do so. So our big thing is aligning with the needs of teachers and then hopefully the overall outcomes with kids.
But we certainly have commercial games that, there's those motives, those those financial motives, and they still completely flop.
Yeah.
And they still don't grab people, or they could be I've seen games that almost shoot. It's almost like Icarus. They went for it too far, and it just can't get people around it. So you both must have conversations about how do we get people to remain interested in it or stay motivated in it? Do you think there's similarities in that aspect?
I do. I do. I think if you take the financial part out of it and such, and if you just had, some people that were just trying to make a purely concentrate on making a good, playful experience, then I think we have a lot in common when it comes to methods. And, I mentioned that I was an instructional designer, and, we learned things like the ADDIE method and such. And, I think in the world of instructional design, I think people give a nod to iterative design or play testing or user-centric design. But if you aren't doing that practice very, very well with video game design, you are guaranteed to fail. There is no room for it, because when you are creating a playful experience and you've got some ideas of how people are going to interact with it, it is 100% of the time when you put that thing in front of real people, it is surprising what happens. What is co-created between the player and the designer is always a surprise. Yeah. And I think because of that, iterative play testing methods, or for us, co-design is another part of the method, but data-centric kind of iterative design, these methods are, I think, universal across anyone that's ever made a game.
What's that moment like, by the way, when you put the game for the first time in front of its audience? Is it terrifying?
It's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. It's something that I feel like I have to almost untrain. When we've hired people from larger studios where the engineers or artists are really separate from the audience, by many things, you almost have to untrain people and say like, okay, here's what we're going into. This is going to really hurt.
Yeah.
Here's the rules of how to do it. Don't worry, by iteration 100, it's going to not hurt as bad. It'll probably even start to be fun. No, it's really, really hard.
You brought up in your talk, well, I mean, just going off the title alone, the equitable learning. And earlier when you were talking about the sort of I want to say the vocabulary games, or just kind of the quiz games, those kinds of things. One of the things, if I think about like those, never appealed to me, for example, highly popular, but they don't work for me because speed is one of the requirements. And that's just not all. It's not a way I want to learn something, and so I don't want to be the fastest at things. So that's a turn off there, and to me that makes those kinds of games, not equitable at all. Am I interpreting that phrase correctly? Equitable learning, and are there other aspects then to it that you're seeking?
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about education is that I think educators, I think, inherently just care for kids and care for, watching people develop. And I think that word equitable therefore becomes, it's just a category of ways of thinking around how to make sure we are helping everybody, where everybody is always going to be one step ahead of you. You're never going to get there. But there's this process of just saying like, who's getting left out by this? Who could we serve a little better? And I would say that for, field day, we've got a little bit of a philosophy there where instead of thinking about a particular demographic or social economic status, I think the thing that we're constantly looking for is the kid that for whatever reason has been a little shut down to a given topic and maybe isn't a model student, isn't, that one that is right there, ready to learn, wanting to know. And that we've worked with gifted and talented kids too that, kind of by definition end up being model students a lot of the time. But I'm really excited about that kid that says, I hate science, or I don't like history, or I don't get the, math, and I don't like doing it. And I think finding like where a kid is at in their own like legitimate subjective experience, right? Like their story, where they're at, what they've encountered, what they like. And meeting a kid where they're at ends up being our focus when we think about equitable a lot of the time.
What about kids that just say, I hate games?
And that's a place that we can't fix. It's kind of, we're part of a puzzle. And I don't believe games can teach everything. And I don't believe all kids like games. I do think that there's something to the idea that learning is often, if not always, has some element of play to it. And, we can think of like Ralph Koster or other people that formalize what play is, but, there's got to be buy-in. There's got to be, there's got to be some sort of personal interest in doing or learning for it to occur. So maybe video games aren't the thing, but, I really do believe in, inviting, the whole kid to the table and designing experiences that that are coming from where they're already at. And sometimes I think that might the I don't like games could be loaded. There's actually maybe something else they don't like, and and so maybe they just haven't found the right game for themselves. Yeah, I don't like time pressure, for example.
Exactly. Yeah,
I don't like things that make me feel stupid.
Exactly. It's just like, well, let me get this straight. I'm going to have a leaderboard where I'll be at the bottom, and
and that's just like bad game design, right? Because like one of the things that we always think about when we're designing is like, how do we create a system that is unrelentingly promotive and encouraging? I always think of our best games are ones where it's like the whole time the system is just telling you, like, there you go. Oh, you're right there. Almost there. Yeah, that's it. And it's just constantly telling you, you're awesome. This is, you're doing great. Can you even go a little further? As soon as you have a game where the feedback system is starting to be, demotive, that it's come way out of whack.
Well, we should, before we let you go, I also wanted to talk about the Sifter app, which is creating citizen science projects. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that citizen science definitely caught our eyes.
Yeah, that's great. So some of my early work was in mobile, and the iPhone, when it first came out, there was all these questions like, what can we do with this thing?
Yeah.
So we have a platform that we're just retiring right now called Eris, which is like a location-based gaming authoring platform that's been used all over the world.
Asteroid? No.
Eris, A-R-I-S.
Oh, okay.
It stands for Augmented Reality and Interactive Storytelling. And that thing's coming to an end. You can still get it. It's still on our website, but we're kind of moving on from it. It's been a decade-long project. And one of the outcomes of that exploration was realizing that fieldwork activities or activities where someone is like in the world and they're observing a real thing in the real world and using their mobile device as some sort of scaffold for that activity, like that just works. It just met a lot of needs across a lot of domains, from history and archaeology and folklore studies to cultural studies to political stuff, doing interviews to identifying different invasive species. So Sifter goes in on that one thing and basically gives a way for a teacher to quickly create a mobile project that plays out on a kid's phone or an iPad. That, I guess you can just desktops too, but that's how we think of it being out in the field. That allows them to use some sort of taxonomy to describe an observation they're making, and use that taxonomy and kind of code it and tag it and describe it, and then post it up to a shared source, I guess, where the other learners can do that. And Sifter has been used in lots of projects, everything from teaching cloud types to, again, doing like political research to mapping dangerous places in a city that have political ramifications.
Well, there's one I see that's a second grade teacher using it for poetry and nature.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just the sky's the limit, I think, when you say, we're going to learn about something in class, we're going to learn some principles, some categories, some heuristic, and now, go to your neighborhood or in your world, like go look for examples of that, and we can discuss the reality of these things versus the kind of in classroom tidy examples that we have.
This seems like it could be a tool that was leveraged in the pandemic when we were at home learning. And did you see an uptick in its use at all?
Not really. I think that this idea of fieldwork is still one that it's hard for classroom teachers to leverage.
Because of the time, maybe.
Yeah, the time, the structure of it, back to the word equity, assigning, kids homework where they've got to go do some things out of class sometimes isn't okay.
Yeah. Right. And they don't always have the device.
They don't always have the device, right? So there's a bunch of kind of hurdles and challenges to it. And it's really just been, creative teachers that have worked around that to solve it.
Sure.
I should make a plug for the fact that we have a new platform that we created in collaboration with the Maine Math and Science Alliance that takes Sifter to the next level.
Maine, like the state?
Yeah, like the state. So it's an NSF-funded project through their Smart and Connected Communities program. And we created this new project called The Station. And The Station as a app and as a platform takes that idea of field work, but then also does some of the training along with it. So we think of it as The Station allows you to make a project where you not only teach someone to see the world the way an expert sees it, but then challenges to go make observations using it. So here in the next few weeks, we're going to be kind of putting a bunch of materials up around that, and we'll be looking for partners that want to design new geolocative game-based fieldwork activities with us. And it looks like our first project that's moving forward is going to be with Vanderbilt University, and it's really going to be all around the different phenomenon that exist on their campus.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can get some listeners to find clever ways to use Sifter and maybe some other things going beyond this too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And with the association with the conference and stuff too, we've seen a lot of conference projects where people use something like Sifter in order to see things you wouldn't see before.
Yeah. That is an interesting use of it. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. It's wonderful to talk about games. We see their use a lot more, and we definitely can see a place in science education for that and beyond. Not just in science, but of course, we're a little biased towards that discipline for the show, and we look forward to seeing what you have in the future.
Yeah, that's great. We've got so many releases coming. I think we've got 7 releases coming up this semester.
Oh wow,
awesome! Thanks so much for talking to us today, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.